Hello. Today I'm reading Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I love the color here. The cover has like Harry Potter catching the little thing like. Let's see, J.K. Rowling is the author. It has a unicorn in the background. That's what I like the most there. So, Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. Mr. and Miss Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have very large mustache. Miss Dursley was thin and blonde, and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Miss Potter was Miss Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Miss Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister, because her sister and her good for nothing husband were as undursleyishly as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son, too. They had never even seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Miss Dursley woke up on that dull gray Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Miss Dursley gossiped away happily as she rustled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large, tawny owl flutter past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Miss Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. Little tyke, chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat, reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. But Mr. Dursley blinked and then stared at the cat. It stared right back. And as Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in the mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and then put the cat out of his mind. and as he drove toward town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills that he was hoping to get that day. But on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in his usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about, people in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes, the get-ups you saw in young people. Hmm. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos, standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had to be older than he was, and wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him. But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in the Grunnings parking lot, his mind back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office and on the ninth floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owls swooping past in broad daylight, though people down in the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed as owl after owl sped overhead. Most of them had never seen an owl even at nighttime. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal, owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people. Then he made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime. But when he thought he had stretched his legs and walked across the road to buy himself a bun for the bakery, he had forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the bakers. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him feel uneasy. One moment here. I want to set this phone to recording as well. Thank you for joining me. I'm just reading chapter 1 and maybe chapter 2 of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. It's a favorite of many of my friends, of course. Now let's see here. This bunch were whispering excitedly too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. It was on his way past them, clutching a large donut in a bag, that he caught a few words of what they were saying. The Potters. Yeah, that's right. That's what I heard. Yes, their son, Harry. Mr. Dursley stopped dead in his footsteps. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whisperers, as if he wanted to say something to them, but then thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, and snapped at his secretary not to disturb him. Then he seized his phone and had almost finished dialing his home number when he decided to change his mind. He put the receiver back down and then stroked his mustache, thinking, no, he was being stupid. Potter wasn't such an unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure his nephew was called Harry. He had never even seen the boy. It might have been Harvey, for all he knew, or Harold. There was no point in worrying Miss Dursley. She always got so upset at any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her. If he had had a sister like that, but all the same, those people in cloaks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon. And then when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. Oh, sorry, he grunted. And as the tiny old man stumbled and almost fell, it was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realized that the man was wearing a violet cloak. Hmm. And then he didn't seem at all upset at being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile, and he said in a squeaky voice that made a passerby stare, "Don't be sorry, me sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who has gone at last. Even Muggles like yourself should be celebrating this happy, happy day." Then the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. Mr. Dursley stood rooted to the spot. He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He had also thought he had been called a Moogle. Whatever that was, he was rattled. He hurried to his car and then set off for home, hoping he was imagining things, which he had never hoped before, because he didn't approve of imagination. And as he pulled into the driveway of number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat that he had spotted that morning. It was now sitting on his garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had the same markings around its eyes. "Shoo!" said Mr. Dursley loudly. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behavior? Mr. Dursley wondered. Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house, and he was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Miss Dursley had a nice and normal day. She told him over dinner all about Miss Next Door's problems with her daughter, and how Dudley had learned a new word, won't. Mr. Dursley tried to act normal, and when Dudley had been put to bed, he went into the living room in time to catch the last report on the evening news. And finally, bird watchers everywhere have reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually lately. And although owls normally hunt at night and hardly ever are seen in daylight, there have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping pattern. Then the newscaster allowed himself a grin. "Most mysterious. And now, over to Jim McGuffin with the weather. Going to be any more showers of owls tonight, Jim?" "Well, Ted," said the weatherman, "I don't know about that, but it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. Viewers as far apart as Kent, Yorkshire, and Dundee have been phoning in to tell me that instead of the rain I promised yesterday, they've had a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire night early. It's not until next week, folks, but I can promise a wet night tonight." Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his armchair. Shooting stars all over Britain? Owls flying by daylight? Mysterious people in cloaks all over the place? And a whisper about the Potters. Miss Dursley came into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He'd have to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. Petunia, dear, you haven't heard from your sister lately, have you?" As he had expected, Miss Dursley looked shocked and angry. After a while, they normally pretended she didn't have a sister. "No," she said sharply. "Why?" Funny stuff on the news," Mr. Dursley mumbled. "Owls, shooting stars. There were a lot of funny-looking people in town today." "So?" snapped Miss Dursley. I just thought maybe it was something to do with, her crowd." Miss Dursley sipped her tea through pursed lips. Mr. Dursley wondered whether he dared tell her he had heard the name Potter. He decided he didn't dare. Instead, he said as casually as he could, "Their son. He'd be about Dudley's age now, wouldn't he?" "Suppose so," said Miss Dursley stiffly. "What's his name again? Howard, isn't it?" "Harry. Nasty common name, if you ask me." "Oh, yes," said Mr. Dursley, his heart sinking horribly. "Yes, I quite agree." Didn't say another word on the subject as they went upstairs to bed. And while Miss Dursley was in the bathroom, Mr. Dursley crept to the bedroom window and peered down into the front garden. Ugh, the cat was still there, and it was staring down Privet Drive as though it were waiting for something or someone. Was he imagining things? Could all of this have anything to do with the Potters? And if it did, if it got out that they were related to a pair of, well, he didn't think he could bear it. The Dursleys got into bed. Miss Dursley fell asleep quickly, but Mr. Dursley lay awake, turning it all over in his mind. His last comforting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the Potters were involved, there was no reason for them to come near him and Miss Dursley. Potters knew very well that what he and Petunia thought about them and their kind. He couldn't see how he and Petunia could get mixed up in anything that might be going on. He yawned and then turned over. It couldn't affect them. Oh, how very wrong he was. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep. The cat on the wall outside was showing no signs of sleepiness. It was sitting as still as a statue, its fine eyes fixed unblinkingly on the far corner of Privet Drive. It didn't so much as quiver when a car door slammed on the next street, nor when two owls swooped overhead. In fact, it was nearly midnight before the cat moved at all. A man appeared on the corner that the cat had been watching. Appeared so suddenly and silently, you'd have thought that he just popped out of the ground. The cat's tail twitched, then its eyes narrowed. Nothing like this man had ever been seen on Privet Drive. He was tall, thin, and very old, judging by the silver of his hair and his beard, which were both long enough to tuck into his belt. He was wearing long robes, a purple cloak that swept the ground, and high-heeled, buckled boots. His blue eyes were light, bright, and sparkled behind half-moon spectacles, and his nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. This man's name was Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to realize that he had just arrived in a street where everything from his name to his boots was unwelcome. He was busy rummaging in his cloak looking for something, but he did seem to realize that he was being watched, because he looked up suddenly at the cat, which was still staring at him from the other end of the street. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to amuse him. He chuckled and then muttered, "I should have known." He found that he was what he was looking for in his inside pocket. It seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flicked it open, held it up in the air, and then clicked it. The nearest street lamp went out with a little pop. He clicked it again. The next lamp pop, flickered into darkness. 12 times he clicked the put-outer until the only lights left on this whole street were two tiny pinpricks in the distance, which were the eyes, cat, watching him. If anyone looked out of their window now, even beady-eyed Miss Dursley, then they wouldn't be able to see anything that was happening down on the pavement. Dumbledore slipped the put-outer back inside his coat and set off down the street towards number 4, where he sat down on the wall next to the cat. He didn't look at it, but after a moment, he spoke to it. Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall. He turned to smile at the shabby tabby, but it had gone. Instead, he was smiling at a rather severe-looking woman who was putting her square glasses exactly the shape of the markings that the cat had had around its eyes. She, too, was wearing a cloak, an emerald one. Her black hair was drawn into a tight bun, and she looked distinctly ruffled. How'd you know it was me? She asked. My dear professor, I've never seen a cat sit so stiffly. You'd be stiff, too, if you'd been sitting on a brick wall all day, said Professor McGonagall. All day? When you could have been celebrating? I must have passed a dozen feasts and parties on my way here. What's up, Ace? Professor McGonagall sniffed angrily. Oh, yes, everyone's celebrating all right, she said impatiently. You'd think they'd be a bit more careful, but no. News. She jerked her head back at the Dursleys' dark living room window. I heard it. Flocks of owls. Shooting stars. Well, they're now completely stupid. They were bound to notice something. Shooting stars down in Kent. I'll bet that was Dallas Diggle. He never had much sense. You can't blame them, said Dumbledore gently. We've had precious little to celebrate for 11 years. I know that, said Professor McGonagall irritably, but that's no reason to lose our heads. People are being downright careless, out on the streets in broad daylight, not even dressed in Moogle clothes, and swapping rumors. She threw a sharp, sideways glance at Dumbledore here, as though hoping he was going to tell her something. But he didn't, so she went on. Fine thing it would be if, on the very day you know who seems to have disappeared at last, the Moogles found out about us all. I suppose he really has gone, Dumbledore. It certainly seems so, said Dumbledore. We have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a lemon drop? A what? A lemon drop. They're kind of a Moogle sweet I'm rather fond of. No, thank you, said Professor McGonagall coldly, as though she didn't think this was the moment for lemon drops. As I say, even if you know who has gone, my dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can call him by his name. All this you-know-who nonsense. For 11 years I have been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name. Voldemort. Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking 2 lemon drops, seemed to not notice. It all gets so confusing if we keep saying you-know-who. I've never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name. I know you haven't, said Professor McGonagall, sounding half exasperated and half admiring. But you're different. Everyone knows you're the only one you know who, all right, Voldemort was frightened of. You flatter me, said Dumbledore calmly. Voldemort had powers I will never have, only because you're too, well, noble to use them. It's lucky it's dark. I haven't blushed so much since Madame Pomfrey told me that she liked my earmuffs. Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and then said, The owls. are nothing next to the rumors that are flying around. You know what everyone's saying about why he disappeared and about what finally stopped him? It seemed that Professor McGonagall had reached the point that she was most anxious to discuss. The real reason that she had been waiting on a cold and hard wall all day, for neither as a cat nor as a woman had she fixed Dumbledore with such a piercing stare as she did now. It was plain that whatever everyone was saying, she was not going to believe it until Dumbledore told her that it was true. Dumbledore, however, was choosing another lemon drop. Uh-huh. I love lemon drops. What they're saying, she pressed on, is that last night Voldemort turned up in Godric's Hollow. Then he went to find the Potters. The rumor is that Lily and James Potter are that they're dead. Dumbledore bowed his head. Professor McGonagall gasped. Lily and James! I can't believe it! I don't want to believe it. Oh, Albus! Dumbledore reached out and patted her on the shoulder. I know, he said heavily. Professor McGonagall's voice trembled as she went on. That's not all. They're saying he tried to kill the Potter's son, Harry, but he couldn't. He couldn't kill that little boy. No one knows why or how, but they're saying that when he couldn't kill Harry Potter, Voldemort's power somehow broke, and then that's why he's gone. Dumbledore nodded glumly. Well, is it true? Faltered Professor McGonagall. After all he's done, all the people he's killed, he couldn't kill a little boy. It's just astounding. Of all the things to stop him, but how in the name of heaven did Harry survive? You can only guess, said Dumbledore. You may never know. Professor McGonagall pulled out a lace handkerchief and dabbed at her eyes beneath her spectacles. Dumbledore gave a great sniff as he took a golden watch from his pocket and then examined it. It was a very odd watch. It had 12 hands, but no numbers. Instead, little planets were moving around the edges. It must have made sense to Dumbledore, though, because he put it back in his pocket and then said, Hagrid's late. I suppose it was he who told you that I'd be here, by the way. Yes, said Professor McGonagall, and I don't suppose you're going to tell me why you're here, of all places. Well, I've come to bring Harry to his aunt and uncle. They are the only family that he has left now. You can't mean the people who live here, cried Professor McGonagall, jumping to her feet and pointing at number 4. Dumbledore, you can't! I've been watching them all day. Couldn't find 2 people who are less like us. And they've got this son. I saw him kicking his mother all the way up the street, screaming for sweets. Harry, Potter, come and live here? It's the best place for him, said Dumbledore firmly. His aunt and his uncle will be able to explain everything to him when he's older. I've written them a letter. A letter, repeated Professor McGonagall faintly. Letter? Sitting back down on the wall. Really, Dumbledore? You think you can explain all this in just a letter? These people will never understand him. He'll be famous, a legend. I wouldn't be surprised if today was known as Harry Potter Day. In the future, there will be books written about Harry. Every child in our world will know his name. Shoot, I must check my golden watch. Dumbledore's golden watch perhaps looked a little bit like this. 12 hands. Let's see. One hand is on Jupiter, another is on Saturn. That means that I'm going to have a baby soon. Yahtzee! Too soon? Sorry, I don't want anybody to know that I'm trying to have a child someday soon. Huh. I must continue reading the book, you say? I know, I get distracted very easily. Okay, 2244. Well, anyway, now let me go ahead and continue. Let's see. We're nearing the end of chapter 1 of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Or as you also know, the Alchemic Stone. Alright, let's go ahead and continue. Exactly, said Dumbledore, looking very seriously over the top of his half-moon glasses. It would be enough to turn any boy's head. Famous before he can walk or talk. Famous. For something that he won't even remember. Can you see how much better off he'll be growing up away from all that until he's ready to take it? Professor McGonagall opened her mouth, then she changed her mind, swallowed, and said, Yes, you're right, of course. How is this boy getting here, Dumbledore? She eyed his cloak suddenly, as though she thought that he might be hiding him underneath it. Hagrid's bringing him. Think it wise to trust Hagrid with something as it isn't in the right place, said Professor McGonagall grudgingly, but can't you pretend that he's not careless? He does tend to, what was that? Around them. It grew steadily louder as they looked up and then down the street for some sign of a... Oh, one moment. I should probably put this microphone in front of my face. How's this? Can you hear my voice now? I'm not saying that his heart isn't in the right place, said Professor McGonagall grudgingly, but you can't pretend that he's not careless. He does tend to... What was that? A low rumbling sound had broken the silence around them. It grew steadily louder as they looked up, then down the street for some sign of a headlight. It swelled to a roar, as they both looked up at the sky. And a huge motorcycle fell out of the air and landed on the road in front of them. If the motorcycle was huge, it was nothing compared to the man sitting astride it. He was almost twice as tall as any normal man, and at least 5 times as wide. He looked simply too big to be allowed, and then so wild. Long tangles of brushy black hair and beard hid most of his face. He had hands the size of trash can lids, and his feet were in leather boots that were like little baby dolphins. In his vast, muscular arms, he was holding a bundle of blankets. Hagrid, said Dumbledore, sounding relieved. At last. Where did you get that motorcycle? Borrowed it, Professor Dumbledore. Sit, said the giant, climbing carefully off the motorcycle as he spoke. Young Sirius Black lent it to me. I've got him, sir. No problems, were there? No, sir. House was almost destroyed. I got him out all right before the Muggles started swarming around. Then he fell asleep as we was flying over Bristol. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall bent forward over the bundle of blankets. Inside, just visible, was a baby boy, fast asleep. And then under a tuft of jet black hair and over his forehead, they could see a curiously shaped cut, like a bolt of lightning. Is that where? Whispered Professor McGonagall. Yes, said Dumbledore. You'll have that scar forever. Couldn't you do something about it, Dumbledore? Even if I could, I wouldn't. Scars can come in handy. I have one myself, just above my left knee, that is a perfect map of the London Underground. Well, give 'em here, Hagrid. We better get this over with. Dumbledore took Harry in his arms and then turned towards the Dursleys' house. Could I say goodbye to him, sir? Asked Hagrid. He bent his great shaggy head over Harry, gave him what must have been a very scratchy, whiskery kiss. Then suddenly Hagrid let out a howl like a wounded dog. Ow! Shh! Hissed Professor McGonagall. You'll wake the Muggles. Sorry, sobbed Hagrid. But I can't stand it. Lily and James, dead, and poor little Harry, off to live with Muggles. Yes. It's all very sad. But get a grip on yourself, Hagrid, or we'll be found, Professor McGonagall whispered, patting Hagrid gingerly on the arm, as Dumbledore stepped over the low garden wall and then walked to the front door. He laid Harry gently on the doorstep, took a letter out of his cloak, and then tucked it inside Harry's blankets, then came back to the other two. For a full minute, the three of them stood and looked at the little bundle. Hagrid's shoulders shook. Professor McGonagall blinked furiously, and the twinkling light that usually shone from Dumbledore's eyes seemed to have gone out. Well, said Dumbledore finally, that's that. We've no business staying here. We might as well go and join the celebrations. Yeah, said Hagrid in a very muffled voice. I'll be taking Sirius, his bike, back. Good night, Professor McGonagall. Professor Dumbledore, sir. Then wiping his streaming eyes on his jacket sleeve, Hagrid swung himself onto the motorcycle and then kicked the engine back into life, with a roar that rose it into the air and then off into the night. I shall see you soon, I expect, Professor McGonagall, said Dumbledore, nodding to her. Then Professor McGonagall blew her nose in reply. Dumbledore turned and then walked back down the street. On the corner, he stopped and took the silver put-outer. He clicked it once, and 12 balls of light spat back to their street lamps so that Privet Drive glowed suddenly orange, and then, as he could make it out, a tabby cat slinking around the corner, and then at the end of the street, he could just see the bundle of blankets on the step of number 4. Good luck, Harry, he murmured. He turned on his heel, and then with a swish of his coat, he was gone. A breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive, which lay silent and tidy under the inky sky. The very last place that you would expect astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter rolled over inside his blankets without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him, Then he slept on, not knowing that he was special, not knowing that he was famous, not knowing that he would be woken in just a few hours of time by Miss Dursley's scream as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottles, nor that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. He couldn't know that at this very moment, people meeting in secret all over the country were holding up their glasses and saying in a hushed voice, "To Harry Potter, the boy who lived! Yay!" Wait, I need my glasses. One moment. Chapter 2, The Vanishing Glass. Wow. So, The Sorcerer's Stone was written a long time ago by J.K. Rowling. A few of us know about her story. And as a writer, she often was writing anyway. She had lots of things that she had put down on paper and typed up, but nothing that quite fit for a story that she was willing to share or that was willing to be accepted by the publishing companies all around her. She had gotten many failed letters and such, but now, with this book and all the others, she started to gain quite a bit of attention. And then the book was made into movies. All right. So let's go ahead and continue reading chapter 2. One moment. Also, just to be a little bit more exact or precise, I'm going to open up Wikipedia just after I stop fighting with the microphone stand. Oh no! Oh no! Uno momento. All right, I'm going to read a little bit of what Harry Potter brought up inside of Wikipedia. Just a little bit, though. Since the release of her first novel, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, on 26th June 1997, the books have found immense popularity, critical acclaim, and commercial success worldwide. They have attracted a wide adult audience as well as younger readers, and are often considered cornerstones of modern young adult literature. The series has also had its share of criticism, including concern about the increasingly dark tone as the series progressed, as well as the often gruesome and graphic violence that it depicts. As of February 2018, the books have sold more than 500 million copies worldwide, making them the best-selling books series in history, and have been translated into 80 languages. The last 4 books consecutively set records as the fastest-selling books in history, with the final installment selling roughly 11 million copies in the United States within 24 hours of its release. The series was originally published in English by 2 major publishers, Bloomsbury in the United Kingdom and Scholastic Press in the United States. As a play, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, based on a story co-written by Rowling, premiered in London on the 30th of July 2016 at the Palace Theatre, and its script was published by Little Brown. The original 7 books were adapted into an 8-part film series by Warner Brothers Pictures, which is the 3rd highest grossing film series of all time as of February 2018. In 2016, the total value of Harry Potter franchise was estimated at $25 billion, making Harry Potter one of the highest grossing media franchises of all time. All right. Now I'm going to do a couple of things here. First of all, I'm going to create a new live recording for chapter 2. So, hey, thank you for joining. Let me go ahead and sign out here and then start a new one for the Sorcerer's Stone chapter Dos. Go. 2. All right. Look at that. See, it looks like a giant eyeball now. Can you see it? Like how my arms create that, and then the negative space next to my ears. So this is the giant eye meditation. If you hold your hands like this, clasp your fingers above your head, and then push down on your hair, you can start doing the same meditation. I call it the giant eyeball meditation. So you just sit here like this, and then you keep your arms like this for a moment, and then you meditate. You can focus your attention on anything that you want, as long as you maintain feeling that you can see the eye like this, like me, what I'm doing here. The other way that you can do it is if you have light shining behind you and you see your shadow in front of you, if you put your arms like this, you will see the eyeball and you'll see your head being the iris or the pupil. And you can make the eye blink and other things by like doing this and you can see it with the shadow and you begin playing around with it. You can begin comprehending that it's like, whoa, I'm seeing a giant lock. Lock is open, lock is closed. Lock is open, lock is closed. Now it becomes an exercise, meditation exercise. So you got to do 200 of these, all right? 200. Got it? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh, my neck. 4. Okay, that's enough exercise for me. All right. Now we're reading chapter 2 of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or Sorcerer's Stone. Let's see. There we go. All right, chapter 2, The Vanishing Glass. Nearly 10 years had passed since the Dursleys had woken up to find their nephew on the front step. But Privet Drive had hardly changed at all. The sun rose on the same tidy front gardens and lit up the brass number 4 on the Dursleys' front door. It crept into their living room, which was almost exactly the same as it had been on the night when Miss Dursley had seen that fateful news report about the owls. Only the photographs on the mantelpiece really showed how much time had passed. 10 years ago, there had been lots of pictures of what looked like a large pink beach ball, wearing different colored bonnets. But Dudley Dursley was no longer a baby, and now the photographs showed a large, blond boy riding his first bicycle. All right, hold on. I lost my place here for a minute. Oh, that he's now like a tall blonde boy. Got it. Got it. Thank you. Riding his first bicycle on a carousel at the fair, and playing a computer game with his father, and then being hugged and kissed by his mother. The room held no sign at all that any other boys lived in the house, too. Yet, Harry Potter was still there, asleep at that moment, but not for long. His Aunt Petunia was awake, and it was her shrill voice that made the first noise of the day. Up! Get up now! Harry Potter woke up with a start. His aunt rapped on the door again. Pop, 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 pop. Up! She screeched. Harry heard her walking toward the kitchen and then the sound of the frying pan being put on the stove. He rolled onto his back and then tried to remember the dream that he had been having. It had been a good one. There had been a flying motorcycle in it. He had a funny feeling that he had had that same dream before. His aunt was back outside the door. Are you up yet? Nearly, said Harry. Well, get a move on. I want you to look after the hot bacon. Don't you dare let it burn. I want everything perfect on Dudley's birthday. Harry groaned. What do you say? His aunt snapped through the door. Nothing. Dudley's birthday. How could he have forgotten? Harry got slowly out of bed and started looking for socks. He found a pair under his bed, and after pulling a spider off of one of them, put them on. Harry was used to spiders, because the cupboard under the stairs was full of them, and that was where he slept. And when he was dressed, he went down the hall into the kitchen. The table was almost hidden beneath all of Dudley's birthday presents. It looked as though Dudley had gotten the new computer he wanted, not to mention the second television and the racing bike. Exactly why Dudley wanted a racing bike was a mystery to Harry, as Dudley was very fat and hated exercise. Unless it, of course, involved punching somebody. Dudley's favorite punching bag was Harry, but he couldn't often catch him. Harry didn't look it, but he was very fast. Perhaps it had something to do with living in a dark cupboard, but Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. He looked even smaller and skinnier than he really was because all he had to wear were old clothes of Dudley's, and Dudley was about 4 times bigger than he was. Harry had a thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of Scotch tape because of all the times Dudley had decided to punch him on the nose. The only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was a very thin scar on his forehead that was shaped like a bolt of lightning. He had had it as long as he could remember, and the first question that he could remember asking his Aunt Petunia was how he had gotten it. In the car crash, when your parents died, she said, and don't ask questions. Don't ask questions. That was the first rule for a quiet life with the Dursleys. Uncle Vernon then entered the kitchen as Harry was turning over the bacon. Comb your hair, he barked, by way of a morning greeting. About once a week, Uncle Vernon looked over the top of his newspaper and then shouted that Harry needed a haircut. Harry must have had more haircuts than the rest of the boys in his class put together, but it made no difference. His hair simply grew that way, all over the place. Harry was frying eggs by the time Dudley arrived in the kitchen with his mother. Dudley looked a lot like Uncle Vernon. He had a large, pink face, not much of a neck, and small, watery blue eyes, and thick blonde hair that laid smoothly on his thick, fat head. Aunt Petunia often said that Dudley looked like a baby angel, and Harry often said that Dudley looked like a pig in a wig. Harry then put the plates of eggs and bacon on the table, which was difficult as there wasn't much room. Dudley, meanwhile, was counting his presents. Then his face fell. 36, he said, looking up at his mother and father. That's 2 less than last year. Darling, we haven't counted Aunt Margie's present. See? It's here under this big one from Mommy and Daddy. All right. 37, then, said Dudley, going red in the face. Harry, who could see a huge Dudley tantrum coming on, began wolfing down his bacon as fast as possible in case Dudley turned the table over. Aunt Petunia obviously scented danger too, because she said quickly, and we'll buy you another 2 presents while we're out today. How's that, pumpkin? 2 more presents? Is that all right? Dudley thought for a moment. It looked like hard work. Then finally, he said slowly, "So I'll have 30. I'll have 39 sweetums," said Aunt Petunia. Oh. Dudley then sat down heavily, poof, and grabbed the nearest parcel. All right, then. Uncle Vernon chuckled. Little Tyke wants his money's worth, just like his father. Attaboy, Dudley. He ruffled Dudley's hair. At that moment, the telephone rang, and Aunt Petunia then went to answer it, while Harry and Uncle Vernon watched Dudley unwrap the racing bike, a video camera, a remote control airplane, 16 new computer games, and a VCR. He was ripping the paper off of a gold wristwatch when Aunt Petunia then came from the telephone, looking both angry and worried. Bad news, Vernon, she said. Miss Figg's broken her leg. She can't take him. She jerked her head in Harry's direction. Dudley's mouth fell open in horror, but Harry's heart gave a leap. Every year on Dudley's birthday, his parents took him and a friend out for the day to an adventure parks, hamburger restaurants, or the movies. Every year. And then Harry was usually left behind with Miss Figg, a mad old lady who lived 2 streets away. Harry hated it there. The whole house smelled of cabbage, and Miss Figg made him look at photographs of all the cats that she had ever owned. I myself find looking at cats a little boring if somebody did that to me. But I love cats. Meow, 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 meow. All right, so, cats. No, I'm going to have to resist doing it this time because I don't want to interrupt the reading of the book. But, Dudley's mouth fell open in horror. But Harry's heart gave a leap. Every year on Dudley's birthday, his parents would take him and a friend out for the day to adventure parks, hamburger restaurants, or the movies. Every year. And then Harry was left behind with Miss Figg, a mad old woman who lived 2 streets away. Harry hated it there. The whole house smelled of cabbage, and Miss Figg made him look at photographs of all of the cats that she had ever owned. Now what? Said Aunt Petunia, looking furiously at Harry, as though he had planned this. Harry knew he ought to feel sorry that Miss Fig had broken her leg. But it wasn't easy when he then reminded himself that it would be a whole year before he had to look at Tibbles, Snowy, Mr. Paws, and Tufty again. We could phone Marge, Uncle Vernon suggested. Don't be silly, Vernon. She hates the boy. The Dursleys often spoke about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there, or rather, as though he was something very nasty that couldn't understand them. Like a slug. What about what's her name? Your friend, Yvonne? She's on vacation in Majorca, snapped Aunt Petunia. You could just leave me here, Harry put in hopefully. He'd be able to watch what he wanted on television for a change. Maybe even have a go on Dudley's computer. Aunt Petunia looked as though she had just swallowed a lemon. Oh, come back and find the house in ruins, she snarled. I won't blow up the house. He wasn't really crying. It had been years since he had really cried, but he knew that if he screwed up his face and then wailed, that his mother would give him anything that he wanted. Mommy won't let him spoil your special day, she cried, flinging her arms around him. I don't want him to come, Dudley yelled between huge pretend sobs. He always spoils everything. Then he shot Harry a nasty grin through the gap in his mother's arms. Just then the doorbell rang. Oh, good Lord, they're here, said Aunt Petunia frantically. And a moment later, Dudley's best friend, Piers Polkies, walked in with his mother. Piers was a scrawny boy with a face like a rat. He was usually the one who held people's arms behind their backs while Dudley hit them. And Dudley stopped pretending to cry at once. Half an hour later, Harry, who couldn't believe his luck, was sitting in the back of the Dursleys' car with Piers and Dudley, on the way to the zoo for the first time in his life. His aunt and uncle hadn't been able to think of anything to do with him. But before they had left, Uncle Vernon had taken Harry aside. I'm warning you, he said, putting his large purple face right up close to Harry's. I'm warning you now, boy. Any funny business, anything at all, you'll be in that cupboard from now until Christmas. I'm not going to do anything, said Harry, honestly. But Uncle Vernon didn't believe him. No one ever did. The problem was, strange things often happened around Harry, and it was just no good telling the Dursleys that he didn't make them happen. Once, Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back from the barber's looking as though he hadn't been at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and then cut his hair so short that he was almost bald except for his bangs, which she left to hide that horrible scar. Dudley had laughed himself silly at Harry, who spent a sleepless night imagining school the next day, where he was already laughed at for his baggy clothes and taped on glasses. Next morning, however, he had gotten up to find his hair exactly as it had been before Aunt Petunia had sheared it off. And he had been given a week in his cupboard for this, even though he had tried to explain that he couldn't explain how it had grown back so quickly. And another time, Aunt Petunia had been trying to force him into a revolting old sweater of Dudley's, brown with orange puffballs. The harder she tried to pull it over his head, the smaller it seemed to become, until finally it might have fitted a hand puppet. but certainly wouldn't fit Harry. Aunt Petunia had decided it must have shrunk in the wash, and to his great relief, Harry wasn't punished. On the other hand, he had gotten into terrible trouble for being found on the roof of the school kitchen. Dudley's gang had been chasing him as usual when, as much to Harry's surprise as anyone else's, there he was, sitting in the chimney. The Dursleys had received a very angry letter from Harry's headmistress, telling them Harry had been climbing school buildings, but all he had tried to do, as he shouted at Uncle Vernon through the locked doors of his cupboard, was just jump behind the big trash cans outside the kitchen doors. Harry supposed that the wind must have caught him in mid-jump. But today, nothing was going to go wrong. It was even worth being with Dudley and Piers to be spending the day somewhere that wasn't school. His cupboard on Miss Fig's cabbage-smelling living room. And while he drove, Uncle Vernon complained to Aunt Petunia. He liked to complain about things. People at work, Harry, the council, Harry, the bank, and then Harry were just a few of his favorite subjects. This morning it was motorcycles. Roaring along like maniacs, the young hoodlums, he said, as a motorcycle overtook them. Hey, I had a dream about a motorcycle, said Harry, remembering suddenly. It was flying. Uncle Vernon nearly crashed in the car in the front. Then he turned right around in his seat and yelled at Harry, his face like a gigantic beet with a mustache. Motorcycles don't fly! Dudley and Piers sniggered. I know they don't, said Harry. It's only a dream. But he wished that he hadn't said anything. There was one thing that the Dudleys hated even more than his asking questions. It was his talking about anything acting in a way that it shouldn't. No matter if it was in a dream or even in a cartoon, they seemed to think that he might get dangerous ideas. It was a very sunny Saturday, and the zoo was crowded with families. The Dursleys brought Dudley and Piers large chocolate ice creams at the entrance, and then, because the smiling lady in the van had asked Harry what he wanted before they could hurry him away, they bought him a cheap lemon ice pop. It wasn't bad either, Harry Potter thought, licking it as they watched a gorilla scratching his head, who looked remarkably like Dudley, except that it wasn't blonde. Harry had the best morning he had had in a long time. He was careful to walk a little way apart from the Dursleys, so that Dudley and Piers, who were starting to get bored with the animals by lunchtime, wouldn't fall back on their favorite hobby of hitting him. Then they ate in the zoo restaurant, and when Dudley had a tantrum because his Knickerbocker glory didn't have enough ice cream on top, Uncle Vernon then bought him another one, and Harry was allowed to finish the first. Harry felt afterward that he should have known that it was all too good to last. After lunch, they went to the reptile house. It was cool and dark in there, with lit windows all along the walls. Behind the glass, all sorts of lizards and snakes were crawling and slithering over bits of wood and stone. Dudley and Piers wanted to see huge, poisonous cobras and thick, man-crushing pythons. Dudley quickly found the largest snake in the place. It could have wrapped its body twice around Uncle Vernon's car and then crushed it into a trash can. But at that moment, it didn't look in the mood. In fact, it was fast asleep. Wait, one moment. Dudley stood with his nose pressed against the glass, staring at the glistening brown coils. "Make it move," he whined at his father. Uncle Vernon tapped on the glass, but the snake didn't budge. "Do it again," Dudley ordered. Then Uncle Vernon rapped the glass smartly with his knuckles, but the snake just snoozed on. "This is boring," Dudley moaned. Then he shuffled away. Harry then moved in front of the tank and looked intently at the snake. He wouldn't have been surprised if it had died of boredom itself. No company except stupid people drumming their fingers on the glass, trying to disturb it all day. It was worse than having a cupboard as a bedroom, where the only visitor was Aunt Petunia, hammering on the door to wake you up. At least, he got to visit the rest of the house. The snake suddenly opened its beady eyes. Slowly, very slowly, it raised its head till its eyes were on a level with Harry's. Then it winked. The snake jerked its head towards Uncle Vernon and Dudley, then raised its eyes to the ceiling. "I get that all the time." "I know," Harry murmured through the glass, though he wasn't sure that the snake could hear him. "It must be really annoying." The snake nodded vigorously. "So, where do you come from anyway?" Harry asked. The snake jabbed its tail at a little sign next to the glass. Harry peered at it. "Boa constrictor, Brazil." So was it nice there? The boa constrictor jabbed its tail at the sign again. Poof, poof, and Harry read on. This specimen was bred in the zoo." I see. So you've never been to Brazil? The snake shook its head. A deafening shout behind Harry made both of them jump. "Dudley! Mr. Dursley! Come and look at the snake! You won't believe it, what it's doing!" Dudley came waddling towards them as fast as he could. "Out of the way, you!" he said, punching Harry in the ribs. Caught by surprise, Harry fell hard on the concrete floor. What came next happened so fast that no one saw how it happened. 1 second, Piers and Dudley were leaning right up close to the glass. The next, they leaped back with howls of horror. "Ah!" Harry sat up and gasped. The glass front of the boa constrictor's tank had vanished. The great snake was uncoiling itself rapidly, slithering out onto the floor. People throughout the reptile house screamed, then started running for the exits. "Ah! Ah!" And as the snake slid swiftly past them, Harry could have sworn a low, hissing voice said, "Priscilla, here I come. Thanks, amigo." The keeper of the reptile house was in shock. "The glass," he kept saying. "Where did the glass go? Where did the glass go? Where did the glass go?" One moment. The zoo director himself made Aunt Petunia a cup of strong, sweet tea, while he apologized over and over again. Piers and Dudley could only gibber. As far as Harry had seen, the snake hadn't done anything except snap playfully at their heads or heels as they passed. But by the time they were all back in Uncle Vernon's car, sorry, I made two mistakes there. Let me just start over. The zoo director himself made Aunt Petunia a cup of strong, sweet tea, while he apologized over and over again. Piers and Dudley could only gibber. As far as Harry had seen, the snake hadn't done anything except to snap playfully at their heels as it passed. But by the time they were all back in Uncle Vernon's car, Dudley was telling them how it had nearly bitten off his leg, while Piers was swearing that it had tried to squeeze him to death. But then, worst of all, for Harry at least, was Piers calming down enough to say, "Harry was talking to it, weren't you, Harry?" Uncle Vernon waited until Piers was safely out of the house before starting on Harry. He was so angry he could hardly speak. Then he managed to say, "Go, cupboard, stay, no meals," before he collapsed into a chair. And Aunt Petunia had to run and get him a large brandy. Harry laid in his dark cupboard for much later, wishing that he had a watch. He didn't know what time it was, and he couldn't be sure that the Dursleys were asleep yet. Until they were, he couldn't risk sneaking to the kitchen for some food. He had lived with the Dursleys almost 10 years. 10 miserable years. As long as he could remember. And ever since he had been a baby and his parents had died in that car crash. He couldn't remember being in the car when his parents had died. But sometimes, when he strained his memory during long hours in his cupboard, he came up with a strange vision. A blinding flash of green light, and then a burn. Then pain on his forehead. This, he supposed, was the crash, though he couldn't imagine where all the green light came from. He couldn't remember his parents at all. His aunt and uncle never spoke about them. And of course, he was forbidden to ask questions. There was no photographs of them in the house. When he had been younger, Harry had dreamed and dreamed of some unknown relation coming to take him away, but it had never happened. The Dursleys were his only family, yet sometimes he thought, or maybe hoped, that strangers in the street seemed to know him. Very strange strangers they were, too. There was a tiny man in a violet top that had bowed to him once while out shopping with Aunt Petunia and Dudley. Then, after asking Harry furiously if he knew the man, then Aunt Petunia had rushed them out of the shop without buying anything. Then there was a wild-looking old woman, dressed in all green, who had waved merrily at him once on a bus. A bald man in a very long purple coat had actually shaken his hand in the street the other day, and then walked away without a word. And the weirdest thing about all these people was the way they seemed to vanish the second Harry tried to get a closer look. At school, Harry had no one. Everyone knew that Dudley's gang hated that odd Harry Potter in his baggy old clothes and broken glasses, and nobody liked to disagree with the Dudley's gang. We are now at Chapter 3, The Letters from No One. Looks like it's going to be an exciting one, but for now, I am finished with reading Chapter 2, so I'm going to go ahead and end this live reading. Hey, thanks for joining. Peace out. Now to begin Chapter 3 in just a moment, after I get some nice and delicious water. There we go. Almost ready to read chapter 3. Just one moment, though. All right, adding some friends on Facebook. Then I'll be going back at it. 26. Wow. 57. 24. 38. 27. 45. All right. Next thing. All right. Now to go ahead and create the live for letters from no one. Simeon, where are you? right, I'm going to quickly go grab some water. So, be right back. All right, so reading Harry Potter, Philosopher's Stone, and we're at chapter 3. Finally, it's taken forever to read these chapters here, but I'm really enjoying it. Uh, so, chapter 3 is called The Letters from No One. The escape of the Brazilian boa constrictor earned Harry his longest ever punishment. And by the time he was allowed out of his cupboard again, the summer holidays had started. And Dudley had already broken his new video camera, had crashed his remote control airplane, and, first time out on his racing bike, knocked down old Miss Fig as she had crossed Privet Drive on her crutches. Harry was glad school was over, but there was no escaping Dudley's gang, who visited the house every single day. Piers, Dennis, Malcolm, and Gordon were all big and very stupid, but as Dudley was the biggest and stupidest of the lot, he was the leader. The rest of them were all quite happy to join in Dudley's favorite sport, Harry hunting. This is why Harry spent as much time as possible out of the house, wandering around and thinking about the end of the holidays, where he could see a tiny ray of hope. Oh, one moment. I want to put some ocean waves as background music for us here. How can I do that? Here. All right, if I just go to YouTube, then I just type in ocean waves. Ooh, and beach sounds. Yeah. And beach sounds. Then, find a good relaxing one. Ooh, how about this one? Ambience. Okay, I think I might have found one. Let's try this one out.
This is an app for a project management tool called...
All right, I think I found a good one. There we go. Can y'all hear the ocean water? I am now in the ocean! It's a lie. Alright. Let's go ahead and do some Wikipedia information about Harry Potter. This series was originally published in English by two major publishers, Bloomsbury in the United Kingdom and then Scholastic Press in the United States. Then there was a play, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, based on a story co-written by Rowling, and it premiered in London on July 30, 2016 at the Palace Theatre. Its script was published by Little Brown. The original 7 books were adapted into an 8-part film series by Warner Brothers, which is the third highest grossing film series of all time. And as of February 2018 and 2016, the total value of Harry Potter franchise was estimated at $25 billion, making Harry Potter one of the highest grossing media franchises of all time. A series of many genres, including fantasy, drama, coming of age, and a British school story, which includes elements of mystery, thriller, adventure, horror, and romance. The world of Harry Potter explores numerous themes and includes many cultural meanings and references. According to Rowling, the main theme is death. Other major themes in this series includes prejudice, corruption, and madness. The success of the books and films has allowed the Harry Potter franchise to expand, with numerous derivative works, a trailing exhibition that premiered in Chicago in 2009, a studio tour in London that opened in 2012, and a digital platform on which J.K. Rowling updates this series with new information and insights, and a pentalogy of spin-off films premiering in November 2016 with Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, among many other developments, and most recently, themed attractions is collectively known as the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, and it has been built at several Universal parks and resort amusement parks around the world. Alright, so let's go ahead and get into Chapter 3, The Letters from No One. The escape of the Brazilian boa constrictor earned Harry his longest ever punishment. And by the time he was allowed out of his cupboard again, the summer holidays had started, and Dudley had already broken his new video camera, had crashed his remote control airplane, and, first time out on his racing bike, knocked down old Miss Fig as she crossed Privet Drive on her crutches. Harry was glad school was over, but there was no escaping Dudley's gang, who visit the house every single day. Piers, Dennis, Malcolm, and Gordon were all big and stupid, but as Dudley was the biggest and stupidest of the lot, he was the leader. The rest of them were all quite happy to join in Dudley's favorite sport, Harry hunting. This was why Harry spent as much time as possible out of the house, wandering around and then thinking about the end of the holidays, where he could see a tiny ray of hope. When September came, he would be going off to secondary school, and for the first time in his life, he wouldn't be with Dudley. Dudley had been accepted at Uncle Vernon's old private school, Schmelting's. Piers Polkes was going there too. Harry, on the other hand, was going to Stonewall High, the local public school. Dudley thought that this was very funny. They stuffed people's heads down the toilet the first day at Stonewall, he told Harry. Want to come upstairs and practice? No thanks, said Harry. The poor toilets never had anything as horrible as your head down it. It might stink. Then he ran, before Dudley could work out what he had said. One day in July, Aunt Petunia took Dudley to London to buy his smelting's uniform, leaving Harry and Miss Figgs. Miss Figgs wasn't as bad as usual. It turned out she had broken her leg tripping over one of her cats, and she didn't seem quite as fond of them as before. She let Harry watch television and gave him a bit of chocolate cake that tasted as though she had had it for several years. That evening, Dudley paraded around the living room for the family in his brand new uniform. Smelting's boys wore maroon tailcoats, orange knickerbockers, and flat straw hats that they called boaters. They also carried knobbly sticks, used for hitting each other while the teachers weren't looking. This was supposed to be good training for later life. As he looked at Dudley in his new knickerbockers, Uncle Vernon said gruffly that it was the proudest moment of his life. Aunt Petunia bursted into tears, and then said she couldn't believe it, that it was her ickle Dudleykins. He looked so handsome and grown up. Harry didn't trust himself to speak. He thought two of his ribs might already have cracked from trying not to laugh. There was a terrible smell in the kitchen the next morning when Harry went in for breakfast. It seemed to be coming from a large metal tub in the sink. He went to have a look. The tub was full of what looked like dirty rags, swimming in gray water. "What's this?" "Ugh," he asked Aunt Petunia. Her lips tightened as they always did if he dared to ask a question. "Your new school uniform," she said. Harry looked at the bowl again. "Oh," he said. "I didn't realize it would be so wet." "Don't be stupid," snapped Aunt Petunia. "I'm dyeing some of Dudley's old things gray for you. It'll look just like everyone else's when I've finished." Harry seriously doubted this, but thought it best not to argue. He sat down at the table and tried not to think about how he was going to look on his first day at Stonewall High. Like he was wearing bits of old elephant skin, probably. Dudley and Uncle Vernon came in, both with wrinkled noses, because of the smell from Harry's new uniform. Uncle Vernon opened his newspaper, as usual, and Dudley banged his smelting stick, which he carried everywhere on the table. They heard the click of the mail slot and the flop of letters on the doormat. "Get the mail, Dudley," said Uncle Vernon from behind his paper. "Make Harry get it." "Get the mail, Harry." "Make Dudley get it." "Poke him with your smelting stick, Dudley." Harry dodged the smelting stick and then went to get the mail. 3 things laid on the doormat. A postcard from Uncle Vernon's sister, Marge, who was vacationing on the Isle of Wight, a brown envelope that looked like a bill, and then a letter for Harry. Harry picked it up and stared at it, his heart twanging like a giant elastic band. No one, ever, in his whole life, had written to him. Who would? He had no friends, no other relatives. He didn't belong to the library, so he never even got rude notes asking for books back. Yet, here it was, a letter, so plainly there that it could be no mistake. Addressed so plainly that there could be no mistake. Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey.
The envelope was thick and heavy, made of yellowish parchment. The address was written in emerald green ink. There was no stamp. Turning the envelope over, his hands trembling, Harry saw a purple wax seal bearing a coat of arms, a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake surrounding a large letter H. "Hurry up, boy!" shouted Uncle Vernon from the kitchen. "What are you doing? Checking for letter bombs?" He chuckled at his own joke. Harry went back to the kitchen, still staring at his letter. He handed Uncle Vernon the bill and the postcard, and sat down and then slowly began to open the yellow envelope. Uncle Vernon ripped open the bill, snorted in disgust, and flipped over the postcard. "Marge is ill," he informed Aunt Petunia. "Ate a funny whelk." "Dad!" said Dudley suddenly. "Dad! Harry's got something!" Harry was on the point of unfolding his letter, which was written on the same heavy parchment as the envelope, when it was jerked sharply out of his hands by Uncle Vernon. "That's mine!" said Harry, trying to snatch it back. "Oh, who'll be writing you?" sneered Uncle Vernon, shaking the letter open with one hand and then glancing at it. His face went from green to red, then to red faster than a set of traffic lights. Then it didn't stop there. Within seconds, it was grayish white of old porridge. "Petunia!" Dudley tried to grab the letter to read it, but Uncle Vernon held it high and out of his reach. Uncle Petunia took it cautiously and read the first line. For a moment, it looked as though she might faint. Then she clutched her throat and made a choking noise. "Vernon! Oh my goodness! Vernon! Ah! Ah!" They stared at each other, seeming to have forgotten that Harry and Dudley were still in the room. Dudley wasn't used to being ignored. He gave his father a sharp tap on the head with his smelting stick. "I want to read that letter," he said loudly. "Want to read it," said Harry furiously, as it's mine. "Get out, both of you," croaked Uncle Vernon, stuffing the letter back into the envelope. Harry didn't move. "I want my letter," he shouted. "Let me say it," demanded Dudley. "Out!" roared Uncle Vernon. Then he took both Harry and Dudley by the scruffs of their necks and then threw them into the hall, slamming the kitchen door behind them. Harry and Dudley promptly had a furious but silent fight over who would get to listen at the keyhole. Dudley won, so Harry, his glasses dangling from one ear, laid flat on his stomach to listen at the crack between the door and the floor. "Vernon," Aunt Petunia was saying in a quivering voice, "look at that address. How could they possibly know where he sleeps? You don't think that they're watching us or watching the house? Watching, spying, might be following us," muttered Uncle Vernon wildly. "But what should we do, Vernon? Should we write back? Tell them we don't want?" Harry could see that Uncle Vernon's shiny black shoes were pacing up and down the kitchen.
We do have somebody who's waiting to use the sound room now.
All right.
So do you want to take 5 minutes, finish up what you're doing?
Yeah, we'll do. "No," he said finally. "No, we'll ignore it. If they don't get an answer, well, yes, that's best. We won't do anything. But I'm not having one in this house, Petunia. Didn't we swear when we took him in that we'd stamped out that back from work? Uncle Vernon did something that he had never done before. He visited Harry in his cupboard. "Where's my letter?" said Harry, the moment Uncle Vernon had squeezed through the door. "Who's writing to me?" "No one. It was addressed to you by mistake," said Uncle Vernon shortly. "I have burned it." "It was not a mistake," said Harry angrily. "It had my cupboard on it." "Silence!" yelled Uncle Vernon. A couple of spiders then fell from the ceiling. He took a few deep breaths, and then forced his face into a smile, which looked quite painful. Yes, Harry, about this cupboard. Your aunt and I have been thinking. You're really getting a bit big for it. We think it might be nice if you moved into Dudley's second bedroom." "Why?" said Harry. "Don't ask questions," snapped his uncle. "Take this stuff upstairs now." The Dursleys' house had 4 bedrooms. One for Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia, one for visitors, usually Uncle Vernon's sister Marge, and one where Dudley slept, and then one where Dudley kept all the toys and things that wouldn't fit into his first bedroom. It only took Harry one trip upstairs to move everything he owned from the cupboard to this room. He then sat on the bed and stared around the room. Nearly everything in here was broken. The month-old video camera was lying on top of a small working tank that Dudley had once driven over the next-door neighbor's dog. And in the corner was Dudley's first ever television set, which he had put his foot through when his favorite program had been canceled. And then there was a large bird cage, which had once held a parrot that Dudley had swapped at school for a real air rifle, which was up on a shelf with the end all bent because Dudley had sat on it. Then other shelves were full of books. They were the only things in the room that looked as though they had never been touched. From downstairs came the sound of Dudley bawling at his mother. "I don't want him in there! I need that room! Make him get out!" Harry sighed, then stretched out on the bed. Yesterday he had been given anything to be up here, but today he'd rather be back in his cupboard with that letter up here without it. Next morning at breakfast, everyone was rather quiet. Dudley was in shock. He had screamed, then whacked his father with his smelting stick, been sick on purpose, then kicked his mother, and then thrown his tortoise through the greenhouse roof, and he still didn't have his room back. Harry was thinking about this time yesterday and bitterly wishing he had opened the letter in the hall. Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia kept looking at each other darkly. And when the mail arrived, Uncle Vernon, who seemed to be trying to be nice to Harry, made Dudley go and get it. They heard him banging things with his smelting sticks all the way down the hall. Then he shouted, "There's another one! Mr. H. Potter, the smallest bedroom, 4 Privet Drive." With a strangled cry, Uncle Vernon leapt from his seat and then ran down the hall, Harry right behind his back. Uncle Vernon had to wrestle Dudley to the ground to get the letter from him, which was made difficult by the fact that Harry had grabbed Uncle Vernon around the neck from behind. After a minute of confused fighting, in which everyone got hit a lot by the smelting stick, Uncle Vernon straightened up, gasping for breath, with Harry's letter clutched in his hand. "Go to your cupboard. I mean, your bedroom," he wheezed at Harry. "Dudley, go. Just go." Harry walked round and round his new room. Someone knew he had moved out of his cupboard, and they seemed to know that he hadn't received his first letter. Surely that meant they'd try again. This time, he'd make sure they didn't fail. He had a plan. The repaired alarm clock rang at 6 o'clock the next morning. Harry turned it off quickly and then dressed silently. He mustn't wake the Dursleys. He stole downstairs without turning on any of the lights. He was going to wait for the postman on the corner of Privet Drive and then get the letters for number 4 first. His heart hammered as he crept across the dark hall toward the front door. Harry leapt into the air. He had trodden on something big and squashy on the doormat, something alive. Lights clicked on upstairs, and to his horror, Harry realized that the big squashy something had been his uncle's face. Uncle Vernon had been lying at the foot of the front door in his sleeping bag, clearly making sure that Harry didn't do exactly what he had been trying to do. He shouted at Harry for about half an hour, then told him to go and make a cup of tea. Harry shuffled miserably off into the kitchen, and by the time he got back, the mail had arrived, right into Uncle Vernon's lap. Harry could see 3 letters addressed in green ink. "I want," he began, but Uncle Vernon was tearing the letters into pieces before his eyes. Uncle Vernon didn't go to work that day. He stayed at home and nailed up the mail slot. "See," he explained to Aunt Petunia through a mouthful of nails, "if they can't deliver them, then they'll just give up." "I'm not sure that'll work, Vernon." "Oh, these people's minds work in strange ways, Petunia. They're not like you and me," said Uncle Vernon, trying to knock in a nail with a piece of fruitcake that Aunt Petunia had just brought him. On Friday, no less than 12 letters arrived for Harry. Oh, one moment, I gotta see how many pages I have here. Okay, I'll have to end it there. Hey, thank you all for joining me. It's been an amazing time of reading Harry Potter. One of my favorite books. I actually watched like most of the movies with my friend in California, Jody DeBala. We had a lot of fun watching the movies and reading the books. Couldn't read, we read them way too fast, and waiting for the movies like took forever. But now anybody can start the books new, and you can pretend that the movies don't exist, just so that your imagination can enjoy what it's like to read a book out loud, or at least to yourself. Everybody, thank you for joining. Be blessed. Have a nice night or day, whichever. Love you all, and aloha. Or aloha keakua? Mahalo? Mahalo keakua? Mahalo.